This is episode 402 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Kevin Coles. I'm Associate Professor of Archaeology who's been studying Shakespeare's grave. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Say, what abridgement have you for this evening? What masque? What music? How shall we beguile the lazy time, if not with some delight? That's from A Midsummer Night's Dream, Act 5, Scene 1. There are over a dozen mentions of masques, masquers, and masking in Shakespeare's plays. And when it came to masques in England for the 16th and 17th century, no one did them better than Ben Jonson. He was known for staging truly spectacular feats of grandeur at the court of James I. Our guest this week is Martin Butler, Emeritus Professor of Renaissance Drama at the University of Leeds, Fellow of the British Academy, and General Editor of the Cambridge works of Ben Jonson. He's written extensively on early modern drama and Jonson's masques in particular, including how these productions functioned as political texts, cultural events, and artistic achievements. We're excited to welcome Martin to the show today as he helps us explore what a masque exactly was, how they are different from a play, and why it was that Jonson's masques were so special. Before we dive into today's conversation, remember that you can follow along with the history we're discussing with visual extras inside our detailed show notes. These bonuses are available for patrons of That Shakespeare Life, and this week they include a set of drawings of masque costumes, different set designs, and excerpts from Jonson's text. You can explore all these extras while you listen by clicking Access the Extras on our episode page at CassidyCash.com/episode 402. That's CassidyCash.com/EP402. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Martin. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Well, hello, and thanks very much for having me.
So what exactly is a masque, and how would you define this form for somebody that's unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, well, it's one of those forms that's completely disappeared from current writing. But essentially what we're looking at are courtly entertainments that were staged at Whitehall, at the palace at Whitehall, mainly in the reign of James I and Charles I. This is very much a kind of Stuart thing. And typically they're little aristocratic shows that are designed to bathe in attention some of the leading courtiers and occasionally members of the royal family in the presence of a select cadre of elite spectators. So the people who we call the maskers usually are a small group of people, aristocratic people, maybe members of the royal family, some of them people from lower down within the court hierarchy, but they would have been up to about a dozen performers, usually led by a member of the royal family, typically somebody like Charles, the future Charles I, or Queen Anne. And the other character that people heard of, the people that we refer to as the masquers, and the professional performers who played kind of group, which explained why the main maskers were coming to do their show. So they were professional actors. They talked, they sang in some cases, and after they performed, then they withdrew and they left the stage to the aristocratic performers who didn't talk, but they just danced. And that was the central part of the occasion. These very elaborate formal dances that had been practiced for weeks before the performance, and then that were followed by a series of less formal social dances between the select group of main maskers and members of the wider courtly community, sometimes just people who were taken out from the audience to join in the show. And usually these occasions were staged during the court festival season, which ran from Christmas through to Shrovetide, the period before Lent. But the typical highlight days were either Twelfth Night, January the 6th, or New Year. And these were the occasions on which the performances took place. Now, masques we think of as we tend to remember as being literary forms because we remember the names of the writers who contributed to them. Obviously, Ben Jonson, whom we're going to talk about today, but there were masques written by Francis Beaumont and John Fletcher and George Chapman and a number of other writers. But we think of them as literary events because it's essentially the words that are the things that survive. But actually, these were multimedia occasions that involved all sorts of music and spectacle and song, dance, ballet, extended ballet sequences, and gorgeous costumes. And they cost a small fortune to mount. And part of the point of the show was showing the wealth, the prestige, and the sense of occasion that the court was able to muster.
If there were already professional playing companies performing plays at these same events, why was Jonson and others called upon to create masques for the royal court? What did a masque provide that the regular theatre did not?
Well, lots of things, as it happened. Of course, players did perform plays at court. Plays were taken from the professional theatre to court, put on for the king and a small audience. And there's always, as I said, that kind of dramatic element to the masque because they always involve some sort of fiction that presented the masques, that introduced the masques in the character typically of mythological heroes or semi-divine figures. There needed to be some sort of little drama that explained what they were doing there, why they'd arrived there, and what they expected to achieve. But the real focus of the event was the dancing, as I said, and the music. It's almost like a kind of opera that audiences would have seen. The masques showcase the musical talents of the court. Some of them, they will have had really quite sizable orchestras playing, up to about 60 performers, lutanists and violinists and oboists and so on. And a huge amount of effort went into the formal dances that were the centerpiece of the occasion and which showed the skills of these aristocratic figures, the kind of expertise that they had, the courtliness of their bearing. And as I say, members of the audience were also drawn into the show insofar as they could be invited to take part in the general dancing that happened after the formal dances. So that's a big shift there from assumptions about drama and the world of the masque. Because in the world of drama, the fiction is in its own space and it stays there. And that line between the performers and the spectators is never crossed, other than comedy, the audience laugh, that kind of thing. I mean, there's all that kind of component to it. But within the masque, the spectators quite literally could become performers. And of course, nobody ever assumed the performers were the mythological characters that they were pretending to be. Everybody knew it was really Prince Charles and Queen Anne and that sort of thing. So there's this kind of different approach to illusion, to the aesthetics of the event, which is fundamental to it. Of course, the other thing which made it distinctive, which was that the masques involved astonishing scenic effects of a kind that couldn't be paralleled anywhere else. Theatre, as most people were. The Elizabethan age didn't do illusionistic drama. That was something that had to wait for the late 17th century. The kind of settings of plays were never realistic. They were like such scenery as there was large, emblematic. But masque scenery was very elaborate and was illusionistic. It created the impression of real spaces, depicted in single point perspective and usually painted on a series of flats and borders and stage wings that gave a kind of picture frame effect. And the other thing that was very unusual about this was that not only were these realistic spaces, seemingly realistic spaces, but the scenery changed from one place to another and did so in full view of the audience. So you might, for example, have a scene of a storm at sea or something like that, and then the scenery would change and it would be replaced by a beautiful, calm landscape. Or there might be a scene showing the exterior of an elaborate architectural palace, And then that scene might appear to open in the middle and depict the interior spaces of the palace, or maybe a much wider panorama of a great idealized city. So there's this kind of effect both of illusionistic scenery and also dynamic scenery. And this is quite unlike anything that could have been seen anywhere else on the English professional theatre. And what the designers were doing was imitating the kind of thing that was being staged in Italian court festivals in the same period, where this sort of scenery was also elaborately used. And there are other kinds of special effects that are associated with it, like spectacular light shows and flying effects and gods who descended from the heavens and came down to earth and all of that sort of thing. So the entire occasion would have been amazing for the audience, for an audience that was used to the Globe Theatre and that kind of generally unchanging situation that there was there. This must have seemed like absolute fantasy land.
I mean, this is significant feats of grandeur that are being accomplished here. And as you mentioned, it was no small cost to mount these kind of performances. Tell us about practically how this came about. What were the mechanics of putting on something in this grand style, and how was it physically produced?
Yes, well, that's a really interesting question. To answer it, you kind of have to dig down into the background documentary records. Fortunately, there's an awful lot of documentation attaching to these shows because they were very expensive. And so that means that they got into the financial records of the court. And also because people were interested in them, particularly the diplomats, the foreign diplomats who quite often attended as members of the audience. Then they wrote home elaborate accounts of what was going on in the English court to their home countries. So we do actually get to know quite a lot about the way that these things were put together just by kind of reading between the lines here. But I think the important thing is that these were team events because they needed a whole kind of army of craftsmen of various kinds in order to put them together. So you typically had the poet who did the words, and usually there only was one poet. And Ben Jonson got paid £40 usually for doing a masque. That was his standard fee, fee is the wrong way around. That was what he was given. That was his standard reward for writing a masque. And then the architect, the person who was the designer of the show, who was responsible for the scenery and the costumes and all the engineering, and who in our period was often Inigo Jones, the famous figure of Inigo Jones, he also got £40. And he presided over a kind of small army of carpenters and painters and technical staff. And also he had to liaise with the dressmakers and the wig makers and the shoemakers and the people who were responsible for doing the costumes. Inigo Jones, he's left a lot of sketches behind. The visual record that we have of the masque is essentially a collection of pen and ink sketches that are now at Chatsworth House in Derbyshire. There's about 500 of these. Some of them are big scene designs. Others are just kind of teeny tiny scraps of paper, just a few inches in their dimensions. And these are, but none of these is ever fully worked up. They're all either sketches towards designs or they're drafted pieces that were then passed on to the craftsmen who had to create them in reality. And some of them have got paint splashed on them and all of that sort of thing, and others have got lines squared across them in order that they can be enlarged and so on. And it's very much the kind of practical thing that you'd expect. And then there'd be another team of people who were doing the music. There were usually several composers involved, because someone did the songs and somebody else did the dances and someone else did the arranging. It must have been a bit like putting a film together, I think, that kind of raft of jobs that people have to do. So you've got to think of a big team effort, you see, in which everyone's trying to realize something in which they've each got a stake. But somewhere along the line, somebody must have tried to impose control over it. So right at the beginning, there must have been some kind of agreement with the Lord Chamberlain, who was the court official who was responsible for court entertainments, some kind of agreement as to what the subject of the occasion was going to be, what the dramatic theme was going to be. Then there'd have to be invitations that went out to the people who were going to do the dancing, because they were all kind of really important, influential aristocrats. And sometimes we know that the invitations were turned down, because, I really don't want to dance in your masque kind of thing, because they didn't all get on with one another. So you tend to get
I didn't expect that to be the kind of thing you would turn down.
Well, no, you wouldn't think. But sometimes there's kind of significant personal and political rifts between members of the court group. So we do know just on some occasions, the invitations were declined. Then the professional players would have been commissioned. They would have been given their scripts. They would have been measured up for their costumes and all sorts of things, because they often played mythological parts. You see Neptune or some grotesque figure, a pygmy or a wild man, that sort of thing. And we also know that there were weeks of rehearsals for the dancing before it started. And we've got one or two references in letters to the members of the royal family dropping in on the rehearsals to see the show in progress. And then you get to 12th night and everybody kind of tries to put it all together and keeps their fingers crossed that the I's will be dotted and the T's crossed, though that didn't always happen. I mean, sometimes things very definitely went wrong. Bits of machinery got stuck and so on.
If there were this many people involved in, which sounds like there's a significant group, were these all the same people every time? Did the court appoint, consistently, or was it just a matter of who was available at the time?
Yeah, I think, there are a number of reasons why you might get involved in a masque. I mean, sometimes masques were staged to celebrate weddings, for example, and in those occasions, then the family of the groom and bride would be heavily involved in doing it, and indeed would be footing quite a lot of the bill in the process. There is a period, the period where Prince Henry comes onto the scene, who was the elder brother of Prince Charles I, but who died at a relatively early stage. And there's a 3-year period from about 1610 to 1609 to 1612, when Prince Henry is performing in masques. And it's pretty clear from what we know of the other people who were joining him in these occasions that they're all members of his following, if you like, members of his household, or people who are, particularly feel themselves as having an affinity with him. So there's a kind of a feeling here of a kind of almost a sort of a party gathering. And then, of course, later on, you get figures like the Duke of Buckingham, the royal favourite, the famous royal favourite, dancing in the masque. And Buckingham and his clan basically do a lot of the legwork for that.
I think it's interesting that Jonson was working with Inigo Jones so consistently for some of these masks, because wasn't it Inigo Jones that designed Whitehall Palace, where they're doing
That's
all
right.
of these? That was pretty
That's
smart on Jonson's part, of like, he's going to know where all the strong beams are and exactly what we can hang things from and what can we do here.
That's right. Yes. I mean, Jones actually builds the banqueting house specifically to create a space within which masques and other ceremonial state occasions can be staged. And for about 12 years at the beginning of the reign, there's a wooden structure, a temporary banqueting house, which is used for the performance of masques. And that burnt down in the middle decades, in the middle of the 1610s. And Jones rebuilt it as a stone banqueting house. And it still survives today in London, in Whitehall. So you can actually go around into this building and see the space within which a lot of these masques were actually performed and for which they were designed. And it's a beautiful neoclassical building. It's perfectly proportioned. It's 110 feet one way, 55 feet the other way. So it's a double cube, and it's got a high roof. And they put a ceiling paintings in by Rubens. And as soon as they did that, they realized they had to build another banqueting house for the masque, because you couldn't put all those candles in there with the Rubens
and mess up the paintings. Yeah,
that's right.
If you enjoy learning about the history of William Shakespeare and you want to go one step further to really experience the history for yourself, then consider joining Experience Shakespeare. This premium tier on Patreon lets you go behind the curtain and get hands-on with your history, trying out games, recipes, and crafts straight from the life of William Shakespeare. All of these activities are ones you can complete at home or in your classroom. And as a special bonus for joining our community of history lovers, you also get access to our exclusive library of virtual tours, animated plays, printable history guides, and special discounts on all the items in That Shakespeare Life shop. If you are ready to go beyond just learning and start experience Shakespeare's history for yourself, then join us today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and click on Experience Shakespeare. I'll see you inside. And now back to the show. Well, which of Jonson's masques are considered the most famous or the most influential? Why do they stand out?
Well, they stand out because Jonson's such an inventive figure with the form. I think, he's got this sort of endless fund of fictions that can be used to flatter, but also to educate the king. I mean, Jonson sees himself not just as a flatterer of monarchy, but someone who is able to sell a particular vision, a particular kind of worldview. And Jonson's masques are often highly learned, and they draw on lots of different kinds of classical sources in order to not only to source their fictions, but also to unpack the fictions with the implications of what the stories are that are being told. So there's this kind of educative dimension to the Jonsonian masque, and Jonson sees himself as a kind of, in the role of entertainer, but also counsellor, so to speak. He wants to, by entertaining the court, he also wants to hold an image of what an ideal monarchy ought to be up to it. And I mean, it has to be said that not all the other masque writers necessarily agreed with that. Some thought that he was, being way too self-promoting in doing that, and others just couldn't be bothered. So, I mean, Jonson is the person who most completely seizes hold of the masque as something with which to celebrate the court, but also to make the court a better place. So, you live a better life by being able to dance well, because dancing, it teaches codes of discipline and self-control and self-presentation and self-display, but also humility and all of these kinds of things. And that's a theme that comes back in one or two of the masques, particularly the masque known as Pleasure Reconciled to Virtue, which is the masque that he wrote for the first time that Prince Charles danced a masque as the principal masker. And it's all about kind of learning to have pleasure, but keeping your hand on virtue at the same time. So you can have a good time, but not too much of a good time, kind of thing. See what I mean?
Yeah, little bit of a morality tale there.
Well, a lot of a morality, I think, in Jonson's case, yes. So.
Do you have a favorite one? A favorite masque that you like best?
Well, there's lots of good things in them, it has to be said. My favorite masque in the genre as a whole is not a court masque at all. It's a masque staged for the king, but when he was in the country, out in the house of the royal favourite, Buckingham, who took him all the way up into Leicestershire to see his new property at a place called Burley on the Hill. And this masque is called The Gypsies Metamorphosed. What Buckingham does is he and his members of his family disguise themselves as gypsies. They turn up in the king's presence and say, "We are your loyal subjects. We've got lots of tricks and cunning devices that we can show you." And then basically they try to steal everything. They pick the pockets of the audience, and at the end of the show, of course, they give everything back, and it's acknowledged that these are really jolly good fellows. But there's a way in which there's a kind of a level of irony here, in which Jonson's giving Buckingham and his family entertaining roles to play, but also ironically alluding to the kind of enmity that there's around, the kind of suspicion that they have, that people had about Buckingham and his following, that they were basically exploiting the monarchy for what they could get. And this is really it's a very charming masque, and it showcases how much Jonson could make political comment funny. There's always this thing in Jonson.
There's some talent to not getting arrested for some of the things he's putting in.
Absolutely, that's right. But this is the great thing about the masque and that kind of division between the anti-masque and the masque, that you've got the glamour, the seriousness, the kind of element of transcendence associated with the aristocratic performers. But then you've got the anti-maskers who are scurrilous or grotesque or low or vulgar or just pesky or funny, or in some cases they are a challenge to the court. There's a masque called the Masque of Queens, in which a group of witches come on and attempt to cast their spells over the court and turn the evening dark, essentially. And as their spells don't take effect, so things move faster and faster, and they break out into this wild, chaotic dance in which all the dance steps reverse what the dance steps are supposed to be. They dance back to back, and the circles turn the wrong way, and all of that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, everything stops, and the witches are pushed off the stage by the arrival of 12 heroic queens, led by Queen Anne. They're kind of warlike Amazons, and they don't say anything, they just dance, but their presence pushes the witches out of the place. So there's this kind of combination of comedy and glorification that the masque, I think, uniquely brings together.
These masques are fascinating, and I think we're entertained just learning about them. So if we are delighted by the form of the masque and want to learn more about what it was and what was going on and explore different things about it further, as someone who has researched them so extensively, where would you suggest, if we're new to this, where should we begin?
Yeah, it depends what you're interested in, to be honest, because given that they bring together literature and scenery, visual arts, music and dance, costume history, and politics, all of those strands have had things written on them. But I think the best thing you could do is get hold of a good anthology of masques that would show you the variety of modes that there are in this period. I mean, a really good anthology, slightly old now, sadly out of print, but you can probably find copies on Abe Books or whatever, by my former colleague David Lindley, simply called Court Masques. It's got about a dozen masques in it. They're all very short. I mean, this is the other great virtue of masques. They're all incredibly short. So you can whiz through a masque, in an hour or two. There's also a very interesting collection of masques in a book called Masques of Difference, edited by Kristen McDermott. That's got the Masque of Queens in it, the one with the witches. It's also got the one with the gypsies in it. So if you're interested in those kinds of things, that would be a good place to start. And the other person who wrote, in many ways, foundational critical work on masques is Stephen Orgel. He's a very wide-ranging critical writer, but he's got a lovely, very short little book called The Illusion of Power, which is about court masques in the context of European courtly performance as a whole. And again, it's very compact, but it asks a whole raft of really stimulating questions about what happens when you put performers on stage in this way. That they're performing, but they're not speaking, and they're pretending to be other characters, but everybody knows who they are really. And so it's a wonderful book with asking lots of searching questions about the way that the elements of fantasy work in masques.
These are excellent. I'm excited to dive into them already. Thank you for suggesting them. We will place links to all of these resources along with more information on Martin's work in the show notes for today's episode. So stay with us for the URL for where to find all of those. Now, Martin, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Yes, thank you. I know this game. It's when you can. I mean, my choices change from year to year, I suppose. But I think what I would really like to take at the moment is the essays of Montaigne, the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne, because he's one of the most interesting, humane, insightful, and generally sane people writing in this period, and I would love an opportunity.
Always good to have that last one.
Always good. Well, yes, things being as they are, I think sanity and humanity are values that one could do with a lot more of these days, and they're in there in spades. So I would take Montaigne's essays with me.
Solid selection there, absolutely. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I'm working on a complete edition of John Marston. I'm co-editing it with Matt Stegel at Bristol, who I think has been on your podcast recently.
Has,
yes. And with Jose Perez-Diaz, who's a colleague of mine here at Leeds. And hopefully in the next, well, I'm not going to give any predictions, but we're a long way into the project, and we're going to be producing what is the first complete modern spelling edition of all Marston's works that will be coming in 4 volumes from Oxford. It has really exciting plays like The Dutch Courtesan and The Malcontent, but lots of other great material in it as well. And there's a Masque, which I'm editing. So,
fantastic. We will look forward to seeing that come to life. It sounds like a fun project. Thank you so much, Martin Butler, for being here this week and taking us through the history of masques and helping us understand why Ben Jonson was so good at staging them and why they remain so entertaining even today. I really appreciate you being here to share this history with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great. Thank you.
That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. As we celebrate the turn of the year, I want to thank you for spending time with us here on the show. Your support makes this history possible, and it's a joy to learn together each week. Until next time, may your history be vivid, your theater be grand, and your imagination be lit with masque-like sparkle. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.